Since the dawn of time, humans have flourished and lived through it all, at least so far. And when it comes to history, we could only take in so much as we were taught. But hey, that's what I'm here for. My name is Jessa, and please join me as we look at our top 10 unsettling historical facts that you weren't taught in school. Number 10, War on Cats. Cat lovers might be upset with this, but between the years 1227 and 1241, Pope Gregory IX declared a war on cats. But why? His reasoning was that to him, they were tiny little satans in beautiful fur coats. Apparently this all started when a man met up with the Pope during a confession. And oh, for those of you who don't know, confession is when you talk to your religious leader about things you've done, sins you've committed, etc. And so during this confession, the man told the Pope, "So I saw this cat and it turned into a man and it had to be the devil. I mean, it was dark at night, so I don't know. Oh yeah, also the guy was covered in cat fur." And that's where the Pope got the idea that Satan must animate girl transform themselves into a cat. And since this was the 13th century, many belief structures were heavily sedated in religion and any other form of structures were sacrilegious. Also, this is where the concept of black cats being unlucky started. Now that's sacrilegious. Pope Gregory truly believed that cats carried Satan's spirit around, and so there was this mass extermination of cats by those loyal to the church and the Pope. Because of this, the epidemic of the plague came in waves, and since cats were known to eat infected rats, the rate of diseases spread like wildfire, and as the population of rats increased, the population of the cats decreased. And to those living in the 13th century, they actually interpreted the plague as, "Satan is so pissed at us for killing his cats, that's why we got the plague." Yeah, okay. Either way, cats were still not safe, and since they were now considered a witch familiar in the 1400s, this discrimination on cats continued on in the Elizabethan era, to the point where even during the Queen's coronation, they burnt a cat alive. The war finally ended when the new scientific information of the source of the spread of diseases came to light. Either way, our beloved cats survived, and even if you don't like cats because they hiss and they bite and they scratch, they just want to feel safe, that's all. After all, their ancestors were chased down and murdered for just existing. All because of one man's word. Crazy. Number 9, the unseen grave on Mount Everest. For those who love to climb or hike on big trails, might have heard of Mount Everest. I mean, a lot of us have, but despite the challenges Mount Everest has for the go-to climber, it does come with a risk. More than 150 corpses occupy the mountain. To the average person, hiking up a mountain might seem a little tedious and may not even seem that like it takes that long. But at least to me, I do love walking, so I can't even tell how long it's been. But the average climb to Mount Everest takes up to an estimated 6 to 9 weeks to climb. For most expeditions, it does take at least 2 months. Climbers start arriving at the mountain's base late around March, most likely around the south side of the mountain, and the base camp there is around 5,300 meters and sits at the foot of an icefall. The reason why there's so many corpses on Mount Everest, aside it being dangerous as a terrain itself, is because for most people, it's process of adapting to the high altitude, low oxygen environment, freezing temperatures, as well as the lack of resources and food. Climbing Mount Everest is quite of an awe-inspiring and demanding challenge that requires meticulous preparation and extensive training. Any attempt without prior mountaineering experience is dangerous and highly discouraged. Still, I wouldn't mind trying rock climbing, I just want abs. Number 8, Coffin Births. Believe it or not, you can give birth after death, at least in this case. A 7th century woman gave birth right after she had died, and her case isn't the first one. Archaeologists found a mother's remains laying face up intentionally with her skeleton of a fetus between her legs. This rare occurrence has been noted as a coffin birth, as it can happen when a pregnant corpse releases gases while decomposing and pushes the stillborn fetus out. Still, these cases were more of an occurrence when pregnancy was at a higher risk due to lack of research, tools, or proper care due to ensure a safe procedure. Pregnancy in itself does cause a lot of risk and complications like high blood pressure, impaired liver functions, and for the skeleton from the 17th century, had suffered from seizures. In her discovery, researchers found that her skull had been tampered with, not because she was violently hurt, but because doctors were trying to reduce her symptoms. A very unusual discovery, but it did shed a light on how medieval doctors tried to help an at-risk pregnant woman. Number 7, Rhode Island vampire hunt. Just like the Salem witch trials, there was the Rhode Island vampire hunts. In the late 1800s, tuberculosis, or then called consumption, struck the people in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont. Again, no one knew what it was exactly that was making everyone sick, and so people had just immediately resorted to the phenomenon as vampire-related. Since the victims of the illness looked sunken, pale, drained, everyone just assumed you were turned into a vampire. Am I sick? No, this is just the skin of a killer, Bella. When a family member in Rhode Island began dying of consumption, so did another, and then another, so much that the townspeople safely assumed that someone in the family was feeding on the other. After a mother named Mary Brown and her 2 daughters died, the townspeople decided to dig up her body to see if she actually was one of the undead. Brown's 19-year-old Mercy died much more recently than the others, and so her body was in much better condition. Her heart even still had contained some decayed blood, and so the townspeople equals it as a sure sign of vampirism. So in order to prevent her from rising from her grave and eating people, the townsfolk burned her heart and liver and mixed their ashes with holy water. And they felt that it was a cure to the horrifying disease of vampirism. Well, of course this didn't work, and more people died from the real culprit, tuberculosis. Number 6. These dentures came from where? Every modern profession had to start somewhere, and when it came to dentistry in the 18th century, there was a constant problem with the average person having to deal with tooth decay. To replace what has been lost, dentists back in the day would create makeshift dentures with an ivory-based plate with real human teeth. But where did they get the teeth? Well, from corpses from the war. See, scavengers were already looting corpses from the Battle of Waterloo for their teeth, and now they would sell the teeth to dentists, hence the term Waterloo teeth. The dentist would boil the teeth, cut off the roots, and then attach them to ivory plates to sell to customers. A lot of nasty grit work if it means you can chew food again. Since the Middle Ages, poor people would often sell their teeth for both in use in dentures and in tooth transplant operations, but only to those wealthy enough to afford the procedures. As for slaves in the 18th century, they would also do the same if it means making money. Generally speaking, some plantation slaves were able to earn small amounts of cash from their masters by providing task or trade skills, sometimes even being able to opt themselves out of bondage. George Washington, the first president of the United States, was famous for having dentures at an early age. By the time he was 30, he lost all of his teeth, and it was usually because of a medication that he has to take from suffering from smallpox. Although it was rumored George Washington having wooden teeth, it was actually a piece of ivory in his denture that would fade away and end up looking wooden. But he did actually have another pair of dentures, but they weren't made from fallen soldiers, but they were actually teeth extracted from slaves. When he first lost all of his teeth, George Washington actually paid several slaves for their teeth. He paid 122 shillings for 9 teeth, slightly less than the 1/3 going rate advertised in papers. Over the next 4 years, dentists would frequent the plantation and extract teeth from slaves for George Washington, as well as other clientele. Number 5. Death photography. We cope with death in many different ways. Some cultures mourn for long periods of time, others cut off their hair as a way to show remembrance, and others, like those in the 1800s, like to take pictures of their dead relatives. Life for the Victorians was full of death and the dead. A wave of epidemics would hit every so often to the point where the death became fashionable. Photography at the time was still relatively new, and the concept of cameras and capturing a person's likeness took time. With slow shutter speeds and long exposure times, the living subject faces were often blurry. But for a dead individual, it was a great subject to take a picture of, because, well, they don't move. And if you didn't have any photos of your loved ones while they were alive, you would take pictures of them and sometimes with them dead. Yeah, so back in the day, if your grandmother passed away or your sibling did, you would stand next to their dead corpse and take a selfie. But at least you have a memory with them before the proper burial is made. Number 4. Bomb shadows. War is a horrible and devastating circumstance that affects everyone. Countries pitting against one another and using their citizens as scapegoats for their poor political decision-making is proof that we need better leaders. In World War II, when the war began between Germany and other surrounding countries occurred, Japan was also in the alliance, as they continued with their invasion of other countries like Korea, China, the Philippines, Guam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Burma. For Thailand, who already claimed that they were on neutral grounds, Japanese troops placed pressure on their leaders to also declare war on the US and Great Britain. At the time, the development of the atomic bomb was in the midst, and the race between the conflicting nations was imminent. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America's response was proven powerful as it was annihilating. They dropped not 1, but 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6 and August 9 in 1945. The impact was so colossal that on impact, those directly close to the bomb didn't leave any physical remains but what is known as bomb shadows. The radiation of the heat was so intense that when the energy hit an object like a bicycle or a person, the energy was absorbed, shielding objects in the path and creating a bleach effect around the shadow, hence the bomb shadows. The bombs killed between 129,000 and 226,000 people. Many were civilians. Number 3. Ossuaries. I don't think you can pick these up at IKEA or have a request to make, but ossuaries are typically chambers for storing human bones and are commonly described as places founded in house skeletal remains where the cemetery was overcrowded. Ossuaries were almost exclusively associated in and around Jerusalem, as well as in the ossuaries in Jericho. Its function and origins have been left to debate between scholars, and some argue that this form of burial was born out of theological shift in ideas of purity. But ossuaries can also be found in Roman Catholic places of worship like in Rome, Naples, and Milan. Another famous ossuary is that in the catacombs of Paris in France. Besides being a full room of skeletal remains, ossuaries can also be a chest, a box, and some are even made into a chandelier. Number 2. You can judge this book by its cover. I love a good book, and if you like reading like I do, you might be shocked to discover that there are some books out there that are just not made with leather, but with human skin. That's right, y'all. This term, anthropodermic bibliopeggy, is actually the term of human skin books. I don't like that at all. This practice was rumored to begin around the French Revolution, although I'm pretty sure there were some made beforehand. The human leather was tanned the same way an animal skin was, and the skin was usually removed by doctors. But who did they skin? Typically, they would take the skin from executed prisoners or indigent patients, and these books would be for the doctor's personal collection. Gross. Of course, this was also the time where as soon as you did become a patient at a facility, you were no longer treated holistically and were treated more of an organ test lab subject than an actual human being. This practice of anthropodermic bibliopegy shows that happens when that objectifying gaze goes to the extreme. In total, there's about 50 books of these alleged books worldwide. Number 1, being buried alive. A lot of crazy death on this list, but yes, it is unsettling. It is a fact that being buried alive was a lot more common than you think. Mortality rate was so high that doctors weren't always present to verify the death, so witnesses would just assume that if someone wasn't breathing, it was a quick assumption that they were dead, and the procession of the funeral would just soon commence. But since this was such a constant thing, the situation got so bad to the point that people just started taking extra cautionary measures to make sure the person was actually dead. They would shout in their ear, violently shake them, stab them with needles in their toenails, or whip them with nettles. In Germany, they even went and took an extra step to set up hospitals for the dead to observe the rotting process before the bodies were buried. These so-called hospitals would remain in practice till the 1950s. So, were you creeped out at all with these historical facts? Be sure to comment below, and if you know any creepy facts in history, let me know. Anyways, my name is Jessa, thank you so much for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one.